Welcome back to Our Issues Milwaukee. I'm your host, Andrea Williams. If you're just joining us, I've been talking with Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett about issues facing our city, and we're now being joined by Milwaukee Police Chief Ed Flynn, who has served as our city's top cop since 2008. Welcome back, Mayor, and hello, Chief Flynn. How are you?
Good, thanks.
I'm glad to have you here, and if in fact you could, since I have you together, let's talk about some of the things that you've worked on in order to make a difference together. So let's dive right in, talk about the Milwaukee Homicide Review Commission. Recently, a report was released that there were 105 homicides for 2013. That's a 15% increase from 2012 and the highest since 2005. Your thoughts on those numbers?
Well, it is disturbing. We had been on a steady trend of several years in which our annual homicide rate was much lower than it had been in the preceding 10 years. I think there was a 10-year average before I got here of something on the order of 120 homicides a year, and that average had been reduced to the 80s over the last several years. We had a real jump last year, and it was very specific when it occurred. When you look at the first 6 months homicide total last year, we were en route to having like the third lowest homicide number we'd had in 25 years. In August, we had 20 homicides. In September, we had 14 more. We had as many homicides in those 2 months as we had the first 6 months combined. Now, we had to obviously react to that unfortunate reality. You know, we have done a pretty good job, I think, of analyzing what the problems were, but at the time, we really had to dive right in. And although we had significant reductions after that, and significant reductions in robbery as well, I think our last quarter of this year was the lowest number of robberies in a quarter in years. The fact remains we ended up at the end of the year with a slight uptick in robberies and an uptick in homicides. Now, rolling right into 2014, we don't get an off season. You know, we close the books on December 31st. There's
rolling.
No time to say, okay, that was quite a year last year, wasn't it? No, immediately we're following up. So for the first quarter of this year, we've continued with some pretty significant reductions in homicide as well as in robbery, but we also know it's going to get warmer out. It's not a simple weather calculation. So for example, yes, I know we've had a cold winter, but the first 2 months of this year, we'd seized more guns this year than we did in the first 2 months of last year when it was much warmer. And our shootings were somewhat similar. So it wasn't an easy, yes, it's cold out, so crime is down. No, it's cold out and crime is down and the cops were busy. And we're going to stay busy. We're putting together and have a multi-layered plan for the warmer weather months that's directly related to police tactics, but it's also related to some other interventions of the city where we recognize that in the big picture, there won't be long-term improvements in the crime picture in Milwaukee till there are long-term improvements in the neighborhood picture in Milwaukee. Our part of that is to stabilize neighborhoods, and the mayor has a number of programs that are in place to try to strengthen those neighborhoods economically and socially as we try to help them get stronger in terms of resisting crime and disorder.
Wow.
And there were two things that jumped out at me from that report. One was, this is on average, so we're talking average numbers here. On average, the victims of homicide in the city of Milwaukee had more arrests than the suspects. Usually it's the other way around.
Wow, okay.
That was my reaction. So what does this say? Because I have people say to me all the time, is the city a safe city? Well, I think it is a safe city unless you are someone who has a criminal background, is involved in gangs, is involved in drugs, is involved with illegal guns, is involved with trouble in taverns, which was the second place where we saw an increase in violence, was a pretty dramatic increase in violence. So it shouldn't be a shock to anybody if you're talking about drugs and alcohol and illegal guns and gangs. That's where it becomes dangerous. So if you want to make sure that you or your son, because we're talking primarily about young men and predominantly young African-American men, make sure your son's not involved with drugs, guns, gangs, and illegal activity.
Wow. So this particular report found that, which you mentioning, that 40% of the homicide victims were black men between the ages of 18 and 29. And I think that people watching probably would say it's easier said than done to make sure your child's not involved in some of the negative things that are going on out here, because you know, there are different circumstances, parents who are working 2 jobs, who aren't home to watch their children, et cetera, but there are some outstanding programs that people can take advantage of to give their child something to do. And also, I think your Earn and Learn program is a great example as to how people can get their child involved in positive activities and programs. So with the statistic of 40% of those homicide victims being young black men, you too.
Well, I mean, and slow that down a little bit. I mean, 40% are that particular age demographic, but big picture is about 80% of our homicide victims are African American.
Wow.
I mean, it's overwhelmingly constant. I mean, the greatest disparity in Milwaukee right now is the disparity of crime victimization and poverty, but crime victimization. I mean, in every social group, victims and offenders generally look like each other. But when you look at where the crime is concentrated, when you've got nearly 80, and this is every year. This isn't
that's
just
hard
last
for me
year.
to wrap my mind around.
Every
80%.
every year, about 80% of our homicide victims are African American.
Wow.
About 60% of our robbery victims are are African Americans, and usually over 80% of our aggravated assault victims are African American. So as we, plot our crime maps, and I know as the mayor's people plot the maps of, housing abandonment and poverty and unemployment, we're overlaying the same neighborhoods, okay? The police are most heavily engaged where public health is most heavily engaged, where the fire department is most heavily engaged, where the housing inspectors are most heavily engaged. Everybody is heavily engaged in these neighborhoods that are weakened by intergenerational poverty, social disorganization, and challenged by crime. Because it's the crime in these neighborhoods that makes them unattractive to people who might think of developing something in Milwaukee. And so it's this sick cycle.
Yep.
It sounds counterintuitive. We know poverty tracks with crime. Of course it does. But from a narrow perspective, in terms of economic development, crime causes poverty because it drives out jobs and prevents new jobs from coming in. And the jobs that leave go places the inner city worker can't get. Okay?
Wow.
And so, the reason it's so important for police strategies to be coherent and consistent with economic and housing development strategies is the ultimate goal of all of us is to create strong neighborhoods and a strong fabric in Milwaukee that make it attractive to development and attractive as a place to live. And so it's not like it's up to the police over here to lower crime and that's all we do. No, the police are intimately involved in trying to create strong neighborhoods because strong neighborhoods resist crime. That's the first line of defense. We're called upon when the neighborhood fabric tears and it can't exert informal social control. And the mayor's programs are very much about things like housing and jobs and economic development because that's the long term that makes a neighborhood resistant to crime. You drive around the city of Milwaukee, you may not see a soul on the street, but you can tell where you feel safe and where you don't by the felt environment. And that's a big piece of what the city's got to do. And our piece of it is to really try to create that safety in practical terms.
Wow, just hearing you say that just clarifies how hard your jobs are. So I thank you for all that you have been doing. And I think something that's very interesting is that with the type of numbers that you just quoted to us, the two of you went together to New Orleans for an inaugural meeting that dealt specifically with African Americans and violence. So what did you get from this meeting and what did you bring back with you?
Well, this is a national problem. That on an average day you're going to see 14 people die of violence, young people, young African American men. And when I'm contacted, I hate to say this, and I hate to say it because it sounds offensive. When I get a message that there's been a homicide in the city, before I even read the narrative, I'm thinking this is going to be a young African American male. That's what's I'm sorry to say that, but that's what's going through my mind. I'm also sorry to say to you, I'm usually right. So what this was an attempt to do was to bring mayors. The police chief was kind enough to come. We had some other representatives here from the Common Council, from the community. And we talked about strategies. And there were wide-ranging strategies, some of which we're doing well here. They talked, for example, about steering young people to a Job Corps Center. Well, we have a Job Corps Center now in the city of Milwaukee on the northwest side. And so that's something that we've implemented just in the last several years. We talked about summer jobs. Talked about making sure that the community is engaged, not just the police department. And as you said, we have hard jobs, but this is really a community effort.
Right.
And we have to have the community engaged in this. We've reached out to the faith community. We've reached out to neighborhood groups. And one of the things I think many people don't understand is that each district, police district, each month meets with community members so that you can strengthen that fabric that the chief is talking about and making sure that you've got good communication, because we have to have a city where the police and the community can cooperate
Absolutely.
and trust each other.
Right.
So a lot of this is building trust between the police department and the community as well.
Yeah, so what are some of the programs that MPD has been a part of to help strengthen those community relations?
Well, I mean, it's not even just a question of strengthening community relations, because we don't want to end up in a public relations campaign. We're in here for the long haul. And the thing about the Mayors United strategy that we went to in New Orleans was about is the mayors of the central cities and their chief executive officers and their police departments need a safe place to talk about where the violence is concentrated, as we were moments ago. There's a lot of political people out there and ideologues and people who would like to govern through ideology who want to make it about race, and as soon as they do that, it ends up being an unsafe conversation, okay? This is an affliction. All right, if you look at Philadelphia or Baltimore or Boston or New York, or Pittsburgh or St. Louis or Detroit or Milwaukee, we've all got the same violence problem. And we know where it comes from a social, historical, political perspective. And the history is there. But the challenge is, what do we do now? How do we rise above the political nonsense and get the practical solutions about strengthening neighborhoods, reducing crime, holding the right offenders accountable, making police tactics effective but also acceptable to the communities? And that requires a safe place for a discussion. So yes, this department is heavily engaged in its neighborhoods. We're heavily engaged in our poorest neighborhoods with the highest crime rates. And we're closely connected to the neighborhood groups that exist, and we work hard to create neighborhood groups where they do not exist. Now, sadly, we live in a media environment in which if 15 people have a sign and take to the streets, that's going to lead the news. If 100 people come to a community meeting about crime, you don't see it. And that is our reality. Day after day, week after week, thousands of Milwaukeeans in terrible stress, challenged neighborhoods are working closely with this police department to create safety for themselves and their children. And that's where the work's got to take place. And some of the help we need are shows like this where we have an opportunity to communicate that reality, invite people into the problem solving. Because sadly, too much of our political and media environment are about conflict. Conflict sells. Conflict is interesting, and then you change the channel. But day after day after day in this city and in cities like us, we've got to be working together to find solutions to make people's lives better, because it's about the future of the children that are growing up in those neighborhoods right now, whose older brothers may be getting wounded and shot in foolish gang disputes because they see no other alternatives for themselves.
And they can't even play out in their front yards. That's some serious stuff.
The vast majority, and that's the thing you have to remind people, because once again, and I don't want to overstate this, but it's a reality. For our suburban partners, they turn on the TV and what do they see? So, drug dealer shot a drug dealer, drug dealer shot a drug dealer, Packers, it's cold outside. That's the news, okay? Well, we've got to overcome that. This is a vibrant city with a lot going on in it, and our most challenged neighborhoods are some of the ones that are making the greatest strides. And sometimes there's opportunities to cover that. We've got to see that there's more of it, because people in those neighborhoods have to see themselves on TV too. It shouldn't just be the bad guys cutting out clippings about themselves because they know they'll get coverage. The people that are making a difference in a positive way need to see themselves covered as well.
I couldn't agree more. And I did ask the mayor earlier what was his biggest accomplishment since being in office. What would you say is your biggest accomplishment in a nutshell?
I would say there's two things going on at the same time. I think we're making significant, measurable improvements in the lives of people in terms of experienced violence and property crime. We're also, I think, with the cooperation of our rank and file officers and with the community, producing a police department that's more closely connected to all of its neighborhoods. And I think that's the signature accomplishment, because people who trust their police, collaborate with them, and can produce so much more than when there's an atmosphere of mutual suspicion. I think we're removing that. Cops want to be liked by their community, and they want to know their community. And the communities of this city want to like and know their cops. And the more we can put them together, the more positive outcomes there are. And I think we're achieving that.
Absolutely. And I've read so many stories where there are officers who go to schools and read to children, and they do block parties with specific neighborhoods, and that's just a few of the steps to build that trust and let the young people know that, hey, we're here to help you. And for the community at large, they need to know that you need them. So when something happens and you need someone to give information or be a witness, it's okay to communicate and work together to make that neighborhood safer for everyone.
From my vantage point, we've got a great police department, but what makes it more effective is if people trust the police department and they make the calls.
That's right.
Because it's the people who live in these distressed neighborhoods who know where the gangs hang out, who know where there's criminal activity going on, who may know where there's prostitution or other things. If they feel that they can trust the call, they're going to make the call.
Right.
And that's what we need to strengthen, I think.
It's scary to think. I've heard people say, you know, they hear gunshots all the time, and it's almost like nothing to them.
But that's where the shot spotter comes in.
Absolutely, and we have just a little bit more time. The shot spotter is something huge where in specific neighborhoods you're able to get to the gunfire, know specifically what area it was in, and you guys are looking at getting more money to kind of widen that program.
And this is an area where both the county and the state have stepped up. So why don't you explain how it works, Chief?
We got just about 2 minutes left.
Sure. Well, geez, I'll need 10. The shot spotter is an acoustic technology in which we put up sensors around an area, and they can triangulate the location of where gunfire comes from, and they can distinguish gunfire from, you know, firecrackers or other ambient noise. We've been very thoughtful about using it. We first located it in the neighborhoods where we already had the most reported shootings. Okay. What we found out was in those neighborhoods, which were already reporting a lot of gunfire, only 14% of the gunshots were being reported to us over the phone. Okay? That's how inured people had become. Not inured like it's okay, but just kind of given up.
It's an everyday thing,
all right?
yeah.
So we use the gunshot locator not just to get to calls faster, which we do, and make arrests, but also to locate evidence. When there's gunfire, that means there's some evidence around there. We know where to go now. We've also used it to develop intelligence. Where are the clusters of gunfire? What are the locations that seem to generate gunfire? Who lives there? Who hangs out there? And we use that gunfire as a first step at gathering intelligence about criminal networks and gangs. So we see it as terrifically useful in creating a safer environment. We're expanding it this year. As the mayor pointed out, the county came up with money, the state came up with money, the city's already come up with money. So we're going to be expanding from about 3 square miles to about 10 square miles. And we're hopeful that we'll be able to replicate the success we've had so far.
I love
And
that.
it sells itself. And that's what happened with the county and the state. When they see it and see it in operation,
It's a no-brainer.
it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, well, thank you both so much for coming by. I have been enlightened by all the things that you've had to say, and I really do appreciate all that you do for our city. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
My guests have been Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett and Milwaukee Police Chief Ed Flynn. If you want to stay abreast of the many things going on in the city of Milwaukee, log on to city.milwaukee.gov. And I am your host, Andrea Williams. Thank you for watching, and I hope you join us again next week as we take a look at our issues, Milwaukee. Have a great day.